This is a slideshow of my second motorcycle trip to Nordkapp. This took place in 2009, and on this trip, Boa, my wife, came with me on the back of my GSA. Here's the bike in question. You'll notice that from the 2008 trip, this is actually taller. There is a bigger suspension travel, as I had the shortening undone and I went to a lower seat. These are some additional extras that I bolted on for this trip, and because there was two of us, I got a good communication system so we could talk. This is us getting ready to depart. We first headed out to a place called Fehmarn. This is in northeastern Germany, actually just over the border. No, in fact, it's not over the border. By the Puttgarden ferry that cuts out a lot of driving and gets us to within spitting distance of Copenhagen. This is the hotel we stayed at, very good. Here, this is the Puttgarden ferry. We went up there to get the first ferry in the morning. This is on board, obviously. Leaving Puttgarden, I believe. There's a few shots from actually on board. This is where the bike was parked. Not secured as such. It wasn't considered necessary. It's about a half an hour crossing, something like that. After we unloaded, we headed straight up to Copenhagen and went to the Øresund bridge and tunnel combination that allows you to ride or drive from Denmark all the way over to Sweden. There's a toll bridge, and this is the other side of the toll bridge. We were standing in Sweden at this time. Our first hut was in the centre of southern Sweden. This is just a small two-person hut, as you can see, although you can sleep four. There was only two of us. You get everything you need. It's nothing lavish, but it's enough, and it's a cheap way to travel without having to pitch tent. There's quite a few huts, and this is a scene that you will see consistently throughout Scandinavia. They are very much on into hut travel. If you saw the 2008 video, you'll remember we went to a place called Falun and its copper mine. This is some more images of that copper mine. As you can see, you can actually get right down inside it still. It's become a bit of a tourist attraction, and you can actually go into the mine. These are some of the buildings near the surface. By the way, what I haven't said is that there's a lot of slides to show, so I'm actually going to speed through this quite quickly. So I will be talking over some non-relevant slides, finishing something I want to say. Here we moved on to the next hut. I believe this was at a small town called Sveg. And there is a statue in the middle of Sveg that I thought was a dog or something, but apparently it's supposed to be a bear. Here we met some other Norwegians who live right up on the north coast, between Kirkenes and Nordkapp. And we ended up bumping into them several times on this trip. This is one of the nicer huts at the next stop. Beautiful outlook. This is the hut they stopped in, which was small but adequate. We're actually in Stromsund here. This time we were staying at a campsite out of the town rather than a hotel. and we had to walk across this bridge to get into the town and get something to eat. Lovely night sky. Here they are again, leaving. This is, I think this is where we split up with them. Travelling further north, we stopped at this location as we'd found a Thai takeaway van, and we picked up a Thai takeaway to have just outside the town at this rest stop. Another campsite reception. I forget where this was. Maybe I'll go back through and put some text over the top of these images to indicate the towns, as far as I can remember anyway. Quite a few photos of this site as it was well spread out, but as you can see, pretty much dedicated to huts. You can do canvas camping here, but most people don't bother. They just turn up in their car with a sleeping bag or their bedding in the back, and that's it. Now, this was going north, I forget exactly where, but these photographs, these are a couple of Norwegian bikers that we met in a place called Karasjok, which is the Sami capital, just in Arctic Norway. This is a Ural all-wheel drive, two-wheel drive motorcycle. They were the local dealers for it. This is the Riga Hotel in Karasjok. It's quite nice, but not cheap. It's the outside view, and then underneath there is a restaurant. There's us having a stew, ridiculously expensive, but quite tasty. As you can see, it was based on a Sami lodge, if you will. More views of the hotel. Now this is the Sami Parliament that is also in Karasjok. This is considered their capital city. Heading further north, this is going up now towards Nordkapp. There is a junction where we met this group of Thai people who had just come back from Nordkapp on a coach trip. I always stop at that particular cafe for a coffee, because from that point on you have to, when you're going to Nordkapp, you either go that way and you have to come that way back. This is the entrance to the tunnel to Nordkapp again, or to the island of, I think it's Magaroya. I believe this is where we arrived at Nordkapp. Yeah, there were some other motorcycles there. And a search and rescue helicopter doing I would imagine, landing and takeoff. There's Boer at the monument, and both of us. Scenic view across to the centre, and that's the bridal suite. Just below that white round ball is that there is a round room there that you can hire as a newly married couple. Well, I think anybody can probably hire it, but it's normally for newlyweds because it's very expensive. This is inside the centre, which you didn't see last time. There's actually a monument to Thailand there as well, which is where we're looking at now. This is because one of the Thai royalty came to Nordkapp by sea, climbed up the cliffs, and I don't remember the full story, but there was sort of a monument left to him. This is the viewing gallery looking out over towards the north, and a post box so that you can get a Nordkapp stamp. relative of one of us. Car park of the centre. And then looking back down to the Rika Summer Hotel at Nordkapp and descending from the cliffs. This is the ferry, or what a ferry that was in port while we were there, and we'd moved on here, and this is me, well, sitting outside our hut trying to avoid the mosquitoes. Not a very nice photo. I believe this was the campsite at Alta. Here's the bus halt again with the stunning views. We stopped there for coffee and cake, as I always do going up that way. Grass roofed hut as well. The red door is the entrance. Another ferry crossing on the road south. We were sort of going in reverse. We're heading here, we're going towards Tromsø. Not many vehicles on this trip, but these ferries run regularly, about every half hour. Some scenic some arty photography I tried, and here we are in Tromsø, the bridge and the Arctic Cathedral. That's on the mainland side. We stayed in the Rika Hotel on the seafront. See that window? One morning we got up and there was a ferry parked right outside and people looking in the window from the passenger decks. It was quite a shock. We had to pull the windows quite quickly because we didn't have any clothes on. As you can see, Tabor's right there is where the ferry pulls up. It was right outside our window. These are just views of the harbour and port of Tromsø. We actually found a Thai restaurant. I think we did go in there for a meal. It wasn't too bad. There's one of the coastal fast boats, jet-powered catamarans. That's another view of the hotel, different angle. And a nighttime view from our hotel room, looking across the bridge. I took a lot of photographs on this trip. This is just walking around Tromsø. Nothing in particular, except for Polaria, which is sort of a museum come display about polar exploration. There's a few shots now of me actually being in, I can't remember if this was Polaria or whether it was the Polar Museum. In this house here is a polar exploration vessel. On my 4 trips north, every single time this has been closed for some reason or another. I've never actually managed to get inside there yet and have a look at that vessel at close quarters. In Polaria there are some live animals, there's some seals here. And fish in various aquariums. Another outside view of Polaria. I think this is just a hill nearby. I think there's a cable run up to it, but we didn't go. But this is the Polar Museum. We had a good look round that as well. Or I've actually been round that several times. You could see how polar explorers used to live. One room accommodation, so that it's heated and nothing is wasted. Lit by either candle or oil lamps made from blubber. Right, I think, well, that's the hotel yet again. I think we're getting ready to leave Tromsø now. Oh yeah, I forgot the harpoons. These are outside the Polar Museum, and they are different harpoon guns that are decommissioned from the whaling that used to go on from that location in the past. Pretty horrendous things. Now we headed off the island, not via the bridge or the tunnel. We actually went off from the south of the island on a ferry, and then took a different route, one I'd never taken before. Now we're at that Polar Zoo. If you remember from the 2008 trip, we didn't actually go round. Well, there wasn't a we then, it was just me. Now we took a walk around the Polar Zoo. Some quite impressive animals there. I think this is some form of lynx. Some moose. They're huge, by the way. Absolutely huge, the moose. Fox, I believe. Or is it a wolf? That's a fox. Yep, there it is, the Polar Zoo sign. Then move south. I think this was Narvik, something like that. We were camped quite a ways out of town and walked in. Found a Chinese restaurant to get some food. Walked back out again. Was sited really, really nicely, the campsite, so you got these sort of views. Yep, this was us walking back to the hut from the town. Okay, we moved on, heading along the coast still. More ferry crossings. And more waiting for the ferries to arrive. You can always tell when the ferry is due because the cafe opens up within sort of 20 minutes of the ferry arriving, that is. They're just keeping themselves busy. Looked like a huge mouth opening when the ferry docks. This is the Polar Circle Centre. This was going south this time, and back to my favourite hotel in Mo i Rana. No English coach on this trip, but I took a few more photos inside. Now this is the shopping centre at a place called Hell. This is just above Trondheim, and then this was a campsite that I think we went to just outside Trondheim but south of Trondheim. It was all very nice. They do know how to site campsites and huts in Norway to make the best use of the scenery for tourists. They're not just stuck away up somewhere out of the way. This is a major source of income for them. Now I think this is one of the start of the images on what's called the Atlantic Road. This is sold as a must-do trip along the coast of north coast of Fjord, Norway. Now I've done it once. I must admit I won't rush to do it again. Now while it is pretty, there is perhaps 5 kilometers of really stunning views, including the very famous bridge that looks so dramatic on photographs, but actually when you're there it really doesn't look that dramatic at all. Although I must admit, in bad weather it would be interesting trying to drive over it. These are just a few of the towns, because the Atlantic Road is actually quite long. It's supposed to be all joined up with tunnels between the small islands, but while we were there, at least one of the tunnels hadn't actually opened yet. It was due to open, I think, that year, but hadn't. And we had to go on a ferry on one part, so we couldn't drive all of it. However, here we are, wandering around. More ferries. And then actually onto the part of the route that that main and dramatic bridge actually is situated. We'll be getting to it in a minute. I took a lot of photographs on this route. This is actually in the 5 kilometers now that I actually see as the main scenic part of the route. There's the bridge just up ahead. There we go. As I said, it's quite under-impressive when you see it when you're actually on the road. And we're off, and this is it. This is the real interesting part, and this section, which is made up of lots of little bridges and causeways along a lot of little outcrops of land, and that's the only real interesting bit. Here we're at another campsite, small hut this time, but again, everything adequate. Yet another ferry. That's one thing about travelling in Norway, you are on and off ferries all the time, unless you're willing to go hundreds if not thousands of kilometres on circular routes or circuitous routes. As me going on board or driving the bike on board, Boar took these shots because it wasn't necessary for both of us to ride. Now I think we're getting into some areas now of Fjord Norway that are really worth mentioning and noting where we actually are. I'll go through this before I actually make the video, and I will put some names in here to these particular locations, because I do recommend visiting. They are well worth it. This, for instance, is Route 55 across Jotunheimen National Park. It's coming from, I've got to get this right, coming from one side it's quite steep, but from the other end it's quite a relatively easy climb. But Route 55 is definitely something you should drive or ride. Yeah, we were last on this boat, but they sent us over this ramp to the front of the boat. This was actually the most luxurious cabin we hired during the trip because it's all that was available. It's supposed to sleep 8 people when there was just 2 of us, but it was quite nice. And the campsite itself was beautifully situated as well in a steep walled valley right by some water, a lake that you can actually take a ferry across to save yourself a lot of driving. It's actually done as a tourist ferry. It's not cheap to stay here. There's a sign with Engeland. I think it's a town called that, not actually pointing to us in England. These are just scenes of driving in southern Fjord Norway. Here we're heading eventually towards the port town of Kristiansand, where we were due to get a ferry across to Denmark. I've done that crossing a number of times. I have to say though, having stayed in Kristiansand on this trip, I wouldn't be inclined to do it again. Kristiansand is an extremely expensive place, and the only, to me at least, affordable hotel was terrible. I mean really terrible. You'll see in a moment I have a photograph of it. Budget hotel. But for now let's just enjoy the scenery. This is another high pass heading right down towards Kristiansand, across the fell, on a pretty much direct route. If I remember, it was Route 9, but I'll see if I can check up on that. I think we took Route 9 all the way south. As you can see, there's still snow, and this was sort of July time, I would say, maybe June. I can't remember the exact month we even travelled. Oh yeah, we will at the end. There's actually a photograph at the end that showed there. Now that's the budget hotel in Kristiansand. It is bad. It's all wood. There's just one wood piece or one plank of wood between each room, and it's incredibly noisy. I would not recommend it. And Kristiansand for a good hotel is extremely expensive because of its because of being a port. It's a lovely town to have a wander around though, so I don't knock staying there, but if you do stay there, be prepared to pay a lot of money if you want a decent hotel. Yeah, McDonald's, one of the better looking ones I've seen. There's the marina, and having a coffee. Oh, this is actually waiting to go on board the ferry. The ferry that morning was 3 or 4 hours late, so we ended up getting up at ridiculous o'clock in the morning to go and meet this ferry, only for it not to turn up for 3 or 4 hours. This is it. Getting on board was fun. Now, we were actually first on board, but I had to actually ride up a pavement alongside a load of parked cars to get to the front, which was what they asked me to do. There's quite a few bikes on the trip actually. This is us leaving. As a little aside, when we got off and were heading south in Denmark, to where we were going to stay, I think it was Hollandstederhof again, there was some I think it was a Danish driver who almost ran us off the road deliberately because they didn't want us to filter to the front of the queue into some roadworks. It was really ridiculous. I got past them, but they're absolutely stupid. It was completely uncalled for. Anyway, we went on and we had planned to stay and see a friend of Boer's, Joy, and her then husband, in a place called Odense, or just outside Odense. However, that's how it's spelt, or that's how we would pronounce it, having looked at the name on a map. But the locals actually call it Onse. So it's Odense and pronounced Onse. This is Hans Christian Andersen. This is where Hans Christian Andersen was born, where he used to live. And there's a playhouse just here that put on one of his plays, or as we were there, all for tourists, of course. Here's the two of them on the street. I think this is just outside Hans Christian Andersen's house. I know this is it here. There's a lot of memorials to him, as you would expect. He's their, I think, most famous son. Statues everywhere. We actually didn't stay with them, we stayed at the hotel you saw in one of the first photographs. This is their house. Quite a nice house. These two had been friends all through their childhood. We arrived home. What I hadn't said earlier is that we'd left our children home alone for the first time in their lives. The house was still intact. They hadn't killed each other. And in fact, they'd had a pretty good time as far as I understand it, but they were glad to welcome us home anyway. Okay, we're at the end of this slideshow, and well, on to the next one.